How's it going, everyone? It's Calumbity here, and today we are going to be talking about a video game on the Nintendo Wii. It's been a while since I've talked about a video game for the Wii, and I need to fix that, because I do like this system a lot. It's one of my favorite systems, actually, of all time. I actually really like the Nintendo Wii, for a few different reasons. I'd say the main reason I like this system is because there's a lot of franchises that get video games on the Wii, and they get video games only on the Wii. Like, they get no other video games for any other home console other than the Wii. And, you know, you can look at these franchises and you can say, well, they're not, you know, their games aren't the best. Some people may say that they're shovelware or whatever, but at the end of the day, if I like a franchise enough, then it doesn't really matter too much what the game is going to be like. I'm probably going to at least enjoy the game just for the fact that it is part of that franchise. And that's how I started off with when it comes with this Hot Wheels Battle Force 5 video game that we're going to be talking about today. When I first played through the story, I played through it and I was just like, well, it's not a great game, but it is Hot Wheels Battle Force 5, and I grew up with the cartoon, so I am very nostalgic for the cartoon, so I like it because of that. The story wasn't bad or anything like that, and actually the mission design wasn't bad either. The problem was the controls were not very good. I thought the controls in the main story mode, trying to learn them and figure it out and everything, and just trying to get the car to go in the directions you want sometimes, was actually a little bit frustrating. There's not a whole lot of motion controls or anything you have to worry about too much, but even then, the controls just seem to be a little bit frustrating. The only time I ever had to use motion controls was if you were wanting to do slam attacks, towards like the side. You can do like this thing where you basically slam the side of your car into something else and basically sideswipe it. So you can do that, and that's really the only time you need to use the motion controls, and you actually don't even really have to do that. You can pretty much go through the entire game without ever doing that. So that, I would say, is actually a good thing. But I just wish the cars controlled better, because unfortunately, they don't. They don't control very well. And that's definitely a problem for a driving game. Now, this is not a racing game, like most Hot Wheels game. This is actually a vehicle battle game, like a vehicular combat game. That's what this is. So think of something along the lines, and this is going to be a really weird comparison, but think of Star Wars Clone Wars, for example. The original Star Wars, Clone Wars video game that came out on PS2 and the original Xbox. It's basically, it plays a lot like that, just like a really poor version of that, because it just unfortunately doesn't control very well. But it does play like that. And the design and setup of it, it's very similar to, actually, Star Wars Clone Wars on the PS2 and, GameCube, Xbox. It's similar to that game with the vehicular combat. And even though it doesn't control well, I still actually had quite a bit of fun with the campaign. Again, yes, that's partially because it's Hot Wheels Battle Force 5, so I was probably going to enjoy it no matter what, I'm sure if it was just absolutely unplayable, I wouldn't have, but it is playable still, even though the controls can sometimes be frustrating. The storyline is good enough, honestly. It doesn't need to be great anyway, since, I think story usually comes secondary if the gameplay is good enough. And the gameplay, even though, like I said, the controllers are frustrating, it is still fun to play. But the story, if you do want to know what it is very fitting of Hot Wheels Battle Force 5 if you've seen the cartoon. You are a bunch of basically skilled drivers, and you are taking on some villains who are trying to invade Earth. You are taking on this cybernetic group called the Sark. You're fighting them. You're fighting this other group called the Vandals, which I always call them a bunch of furries, but they're basically a bunch of anthropomorphic animals, and they have their own more primitive style vehicles and stuff that they're chasing down the Battle Force 5 with. And you're basically trying to stop them from getting these battle keys, because if they get these battle keys, then they will be able to get to Earth, and you're basically trying to avoid that happening. So the entire game is trying to collect all the keys and trying to keep them away from the keys at the same time. And of course, you come across them, fight them. You have boss fights with the different leaders of the different factions and everything, and it's actually quite a bit of fun. I really like the way it's designed, and the boss fights are really fun too. I actually really like the boss fights. And towards the end of the game, they start throwing multiple bosses at you at once, and it's not difficult, but it does throw a fair challenge at you. I did enjoy it quite a bit, and there was one point where I get to the point where I was just had a scratch of health left, and if they would just barely touch me, my car just would have been totaled, but luckily I somehow managed to stay alive, so it actually is pretty fun. I like the boss fights and everything too. The cool thing about fighting in this game is that every vehicle feels very different from one another. Like, the vehicles have different moves, different attacks, you know, especially in story mode, they really have different attacks and everything. When you go into battle mode, which we'll talk about here in a minute, some vehicles have similar attacks, but it's not something that happens in campaign. Some of the ones in battle mode have similar attacks because they basically used some of the attacks from the good guys and gave some of those similar attacks to the bad guys in battle mode. But we'll get to that here in a minute. But the actual cars in the regular story mode, they all feel super different from one another. They have different abilities. I really like Agura's car because hers can actually climb up the wall. I used to have a huge crush on Agura when I was a kid. I remember that. I was like, oh man, I used to have a huge crush on Agura when I was a kid, and I was watching the cartoon. I was like, she was my favorite character. But Agura's car can like stick to the wall, and she can basically go up certain terrain and stuff like that, which is pretty cool. You also have Vert. His is kind of a mixture of speed and a pretty decent attack. He can do the spin attack, which is pretty good, actually. I like the spin attack quite a bit. He also has these blades that can pop out the front of his car, and those are really useful, and they do a lot of damage. And his car's pretty quick, and the nice thing about it, too, is that if it flips upside down, his car can actually drive upside down. It's pretty cool how that works. I like that car quite a bit too. You have Stanford, and while I don't like Stanford as a character, I've never been a fan of Stanford. He's always kind of driven me a little bit nuts. Driven, yeah, it's Hot Wheels driven. Even though I'm not a huge fan of Stanford, his car is pretty nice, I gotta admit. He has this sonic boom that he can do, and it will basically like launch music out of the bottom of his car, and it will send the car flying up in the air. And it's really good for doing attacks for enemies that are like below you. And then he also just has 2 dual-wield machine guns that pop out of the front of it. And that's also really cool. And those are really good for this. You have another character named Zoom, and he has a motorbike. And his motorbike is ridiculously fast. Super fun to drive in this game too, even though, again, I keep bringing up the controls because the controls are not great, I will admit. However, it's still fun to drive these vehicles around, especially because I'm a fan of the show. I grew up with the show, so I like a lot of these vehicles. But his vehicle's super quick. His bike is ridiculously fast. He can also do this thing where, like, if he's in the air, he can use it to, like, float, and it will stay in the air longer. He'll have, like, more hang time. And then you have the brothers, and I don't remember the brother's name off the top of my head, but both of the brothers drive one car that's basically a tank. And this thing is, I mean, it's basically what I just said. It's the tank of the group, basically. You know, it can take a ton of damage, and it can dish out quite a bit of damage as well. There's some collectibles you can collect throughout the main story if you want. I'll be honest, the first time you play through this game, I really don't recommend trying to collect those because it really slows down the pacing of the game if you're trying to do that. So if you're going to replay the game, maybe go for the collectibles then. It's basically just these little tokens that will unlock, like, art from the art gallery. So it's not really anything major that you're missing out on, honestly. But if you really want to collect them, I would do it in a second playthrough because you really want the first playthrough to be pretty fast. You want the pacing to be good and everything. And if you start trying to collect all these in your first playthrough, you're probably not going to have as much fun. So that's just another optional thing. So I guess there is replay value if you wanted to do that. But what I want to talk about next is where I think this game really shines. The story mode, if it was just the story mode, I'd be like, I like this game, but I'm a Hot Wheels fan, so I can't really recommend it. However, the battle mode, I think, is actually where this game shines, and this is why I think I can actually recommend this game. Battle mode is ridiculously fun. It is chaotic, it is hectic, and even though the controls may not be great, in battle mode, it doesn't really matter a whole lot because there's so much going on anyway. Like, it kind of just works anyway. Like, it's already so chaotic. Why not just add more chaos to the mix with controls, a scheme that may not be the best? But the gameplay is actually really fun in this battle mode. Basically, the whole point of this one is to collect keys and go through these portals as quick as you can. And if you do that, you actually will get points. And the person who has the most points at the end of 5 minutes wins. And it is basically... it's a free-for-all of 6 different racers at one time. It is a lot of fun. It is hectic. It is crazy. And you also get to play as the villains, which I love. I love the fact that I can play as the villains in it. You know, you can pick any of the Vandals you want, the Sark, you can pick a few of them. You know, they give you a good selection of characters to play as. And it's really nice that in battle mode you are able to play as the villains, especially because there's some really cool villains in Hot Wheels Battle Force 5. And you get the vehicles, and while some of the villains' vehicles will have similar attacks to the good guys, they usually all have at least one attack that is very different. So I will give them that. They did a good job of trying their best to make each vehicle feel unique. So props to the creators on that. They did a good job with that. But yeah, this mode is insane. You have a few different tracks to actually play on. I think you have 5 different tracks you can play on, and each one is very well designed, and it is like, it fits this game mode perfectly. I love the environments. I love the ramps that are set up all around it. There's so many things to just ramp over. There's so many different routes to take. In battle mode, you can actually play as my favorite character in Hot Wheels Battle Force 5, Captain Callus. Captain Callus has actually always been my favorite character. Agura was my favorite good guy. Captain Callus was my favorite bad guy. But Captain Callus is actually just my favorite character overall. Like, he's the coolest. He's a tiger that literally drives this car around that looks like a chariot almost, and it's just awesome. I love his vehicle. And it's not, if I'm being honest, his vehicle in battle mode isn't the best, but you still get to play as Captain Callus, so, you know, I'm still tempted to pick him more than anyone else just because he's awesome. I really think that this game mode here is the game seller. It's just so much fun. It has so much replay value because you can play as so many of the different characters and just participate in this crazy battle mode, and it's just so much fun. And it is 2-player, so if you want to play with someone else, you absolutely can, which is awesome. So I think that this is really where this game shines, because put the bad controls aside for the campaign. It really does not matter for battle mode, because there's so much going on anyway. It just feels like it should be part of it. You know, the controls feel right at home in battle mode, if I'm being honest. But I still recommend playing through the story mode just to kind of get a feel for the controls and the layout and everything before you go into battle mode. But once you get into battle mode, you're going to have a blast. I truly think that. So go check out Hot Wheels Battle Force 5 on the Nintendo Wii. It's usually a pretty cheap game. You can usually get it for $10 or less. So if you can find it for that price, definitely give it a shot. If you are a fan of Hot Wheels Battle Force 5, you should play this game anyway, or if you have any nostalgia for it, you should play this game just because it is Hot Wheels Battle Force 5. But if you are not a fan of it, if you have never even heard of it, you know, I still think that this game would be worth it just for the battle mode alone. You know, I think it's worth it for the battle mode alone if you can get it for a fair price. So keep that in mind. It is fun. It has a fun storyline, too, for what it is. I mean, it fits the cartoon perfectly. And as someone who grew up with the show, I'm really happy with this game, honestly. Yes, the controls could be better, but still, even with how they are, it's fine with me. It still plays well enough for me to enjoy the game. It still works fine. It has no actual technical issues or anything like that. It didn't run into actually any bugs or anything. So, overall, performance-wise, it's great. It has no problems with performance other than just the controls aren't that great. And it's something I can live with. I can live with the controls not being perfect, honestly. So that's where I'm going to leave this. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this. If you did, hit the like button, subscribe button down below, and I'll see you in the next one. You have a fantastic day. Bye-bye.